It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
These are the final seconds.
The lead in the fourth. Can they hold on to it?
That do or die time. And everything rides on one shot. But it isn't going to be that easy.
And it's a one-point game.
This is down to the wire.
They're going to try the three-point attempt.
One shot to take you to the top. One winner. This is clutch basketball. That's the NBA playoffs. That's game.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. My co-host, Kate, is out this week. She'll be back next week. But today we've got a very special guest. It's Zachary Kruger. You can follow him on Twitter at ZK_FFB. You can read his work on RotoViz. You can read him now on 4for4 Football. I believe that's 4for4.com. Zachary, how you doing today, sir?
I am doing awesome, Marcus. Thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure connecting with you over Twitter finally a couple of months ago. I know we've gotten a chance to talk a little bit more. And now we are also in the Scott Fish Bowl draft together, slowly picking our way through that. I think at one point in time we were probably rivaling the slowest draft in the tournament, but we're getting a little bit better now. I think we're about 7 rounds in. It's been fun to kind of start building the Scott Fish Bowl team. Happy to be in the league with you. So looking forward to that season and looking forward to being on here with you tonight.
Yeah, Zachary, I didn't know if you understood the rules. You know that Scott Fish Bowl isn't a dynasty league, right?
Yeah, it's not a dynasty league, and I think that when we finally get out of this thing, I'm going to have one of the more youthful teams. But I'm trying to win this thing a little bit differently. I'm not sure how much I want to get into my strategy on here, knowing that we also pick so closely together. You might snipe me on a pick or two if I divulge too much information, but I like how my team's shaping up, and we can definitely talk about it a little bit more if you want to later on. I'm absolutely for that.
All right, so today we've got a special show. So we're going to talk about some players that could see their ADP dramatically rise during training camp, because we are just like 3 weeks away from training camp videos that everybody goes crazy over on Twitter. Hard Knocks is coming up in less than a month, and one of the guys I'm going to talk about is going to be featured on that Hard Knocks. So Zach, you put together a list of 3 veterans and 3 rookies who could see their dynasty ADP rise. I'd like to start with the veterans, and the first guy that you have is Michael Thomas. He's currently wide receiver 13 in startup leagues. That kind of varies depending on the site you use, but why do you think Michael Thomas's ADP could rise here over the next couple of weeks?
So the thing that's interesting, I think, with Michael Thomas in general is just kind of how far he's fallen based off of a 1-year downturn in 2020, where he just wasn't the player that we wanted him to be last season. He was going in the first round of drafts. He was often the first or second wide receiver off the board in seasonal leagues and best ball leagues. And then in dynasty startups last year, I just want to let you know real quick, I'm looking at RotoViz Dynasty League ADP from the FFPC. So that's where I kind of pulled some of this information from. And last year in 2020, he was actually going as the overall wide receiver 1 in single quarterback leagues and FFPC drafts for dynasty startups. Now he's actually fallen all the way down to wide receiver 13. So technically out of wide receiver 1 range, which I just think is an awfully far plummet for a wide receiver who we were taking number 1 overall in startups to drop all the way to 30. Just kind of due to a down season, an injury-riddled season. He only had 40 receptions for 438 yards last year. He actually didn't score a touchdown, which I was surprised to see. But I think that the one thing that has drafters a little bit more concerned than his production on the season is the fact that we kind of don't know what the quarterback situation looks like right now. Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill are going to be battling it out for this job in camp. I think there's some concerns about the quality of targets he's going to receive from either of these players being his quarterback. And I think that's kind of made dynasty leaguers a little bit hesitant. And then on top of that, we have some rookies who have come in. We have some players from last year who were rookies who rose up the ranks, guys like Justin Jefferson, who kind of shocked us all and really flew up the ranks a little bit with his stellar season that have resulted in Michael Thomas being pushed down a bit. But to see him go as low as wide receiver 13, I think is just a little bit far of a fall for a player who was a wide receiver 1 in Dynasty just last year in startups.
So obviously I think we all would like to see Jameis be the starting quarterback there if you own Michael Thomas, correct? I think that's a given.
Yeah, that would be it for me, I think.
But is Taysom Hill really an awful option if the Saints do that? Because I'm looking at the game log last year, right? So he started 4 games at quarterback. The game against Atlanta, he threw 23 times. The game against Denver, I almost throw out because the Saints knew that they were going up against another wide receiver playing quarterback. So
it wasn't
that
a
one
real
you can
game.
almost throw away. The next 2 games, though, against Atlanta, he attempted 37 passes. Then against Philadelphia, 38 passes, and was actually pretty good. Like, he had a completion percentage of 73. He averaged almost 7 yards an attempt. I agree. I think if Jameis is a quarterback, we get really excited. I just don't think we should be all that concerned if Taysom ends up being the starter, correct?
Yeah, I don't think we should be, and I wish I had the numbers more in front of me. You mentioned the game logs, which was good. Derek Brown from Fade the Noise actually did an article comparing the two a couple weeks ago that I thought was really interesting in his look at the two. And he had actually, I believe, if I remember correctly, pinpointed that Taysom Hill makes more sense for the Saints from an offensive standpoint based on what Sean Payton has run over the years. And he had used some of the historical comparisons for things that the Saints have run over the years and how Hill better fits that. And then I think he even looked at some of the more specific numbers like deep ball attempts and things like that, where he just kind of outlined that Taysom Hill in some areas of the offense tends to operate better than Jameis Winston has in his career. And so he made an interesting case for Taysom Hill. I think he ultimately referred to Taysom Hill as being a potential starter. And I just think that maybe more articles like that will hopefully build people's confidence in Michael Thomas if it in fact ends up being Taysom Hill. But I'm with you. I don't think that Taysom Hill is awful option. He's also not someone who I think it's more of just a fear of the unknown. Like, we got a nice little sample size, but we also have to see what he would do over the 16-17 game season if he was actually named the starter. And I think it's fair to question whether or not he can have sustained success over the course of a full season, which will be interesting to see if he's named the starter, just how much that drives Michael Thomas's ADP either up or further down based on what ends up happening in training camp.
All right, let's go ahead and talk about your next player. It's a second-year running back in Zach Moss, who is currently the RB32. You're going to have to explain this one to me because I just don't see it with Zach Moss. I think he's a little bit of a plotter. I think he's a compiler when he was at Utah. I just don't see anything special about him. Why do you think his ADP could rise here over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, so one thing that I thought was interesting is when I was trying to compare these ADPs and come up with some guys, I was kind of trying to look at players from maybe not necessarily just a performance standpoint. Obviously, performance matters, how we're going to get fantasy points, but I also wanted to kind of look at guys who are going around him who I could feasibly see falling off either based on age or even just individual roles within their offense and how they might shape up over the course of the year. I'm not the biggest Zach Moss fan, but I do think that when we see some of these players who he's going around, guys like Mike Davis, who has certainly got many years on Zach Moss. I believe that Mike Davis is creeping up on his age 30 season. I think he's 29 right now. James Robinson, who had a nice season last year, but is by all accounts, in the minds of many, being relegated to perhaps backup duties. Hopefully for some people, he still gets a little bit of work. And then guys like Kareem Hunt, who is a solid player in his own right and certainly a league winner if something ever happens to Nick Chubb. But when speaking in terms of fantasy, even he has years on Zach Moss and is still technically a backup, whereas I think that there's an opportunity where if we hear training camp reports that Zach Moss becomes a starter in Buffalo, he's still operating in a good offense. He was, I believe, one of the top in his class as a rookie in broken tackles in college. So I think little things like that make him an interesting player who, if he is in fact named the de facto starter in the Buffalo Bills offense, could be given some opportunities to score. He's still young, and I think that he's someone who can move up boards. Not a massive jump, but enough where we're still talking about him as a player who rose, who could also serve a purpose for fantasy drafters who are looking to acquire him in startup drafts.
Like, we think he could potentially be like a low end RB2 with a little bit of buzz, right? Like, that's really the hope here, correct?
Yeah. I don't see Zach Moss being a guy who's gonna like leapfrog a whole bunch of these guys. He's got a lot of good names ahead of him, including some guys we're gonna talk about later on. So I don't want to get too much into it, but I don't see him, leapfrogging guys like Josh Jacobs going as the RB22, Dave Montgomery as the RB21, or even guys like, Miles Sanders, Aaron Jones, Austin Eckler. I don't think anyone's thinking that he's going to go up that high. But there are some guys where he's going around. Like I don't think it would be improbable to think that maybe he's going ahead of someone like Myles Gaskin, who's currently going 5 spots ahead of him if he's named the starter. I already mentioned Mike Davis. A.J. Dillon is still a backup to Aaron Jones. Dillon's going ahead of Zach Moss right now by 2 picks. So there's even a chance that Zach Moss could jump a few spots here. So I'm not trying to go as crazy as to say that Zach Moss is going to be this high-end RB1 or low-end, high-end, low-end RB1, high-end RB2. But I do think there's a chance that his ADP could rise a little bit. Even someone like Chris Carson, who's been around the league for a minute now and has an injury history, like someone like that. People want to take him right now, but if I'm trying to find the ways to infuse my team with a little bit of youth, much like my Scott Fishbowl team, someone like Chris Carson, who I think is probably closer to being out of the league than in the league. Zach Moss being named the starter in a good offense, possibly rising up the dynasty ranks just enough to maybe push some of these other guys back, realizing that you're going to have him for a few years, and if he performs well enough to the Bills' expectations, he'll be a starter for this year and possibly even 2022.
All right, let's take a quick break so I can tell you guys about BetOnline, the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your sports action. Baseball season is in full swing, and you can track all of the action on BetOnline. Before the next pitch, head over to BetOnline on your laptop or mobile device and check out all the great sporting news, sign-up bonuses, and contest information. Don't sit on the sidelines anymore, as this is your chance to get into the game as teams prep for their runs to the playoffs. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts.
Yeah, you're making sports bets, but are you making winning sports bets? To win consistently, you need an edge, research, analytics. It's a lot. Or you could let BetQL do the work for you. Every game, every potential bet, from winners and losers to all the sides and totals, line movement, player props, and more. All backed by BetQL's proven data and analytics. BetQL analyzes over 350,000 unique bets every year and rates each potential bet on a scale of 1 to 5 stars. A 5-star is definitely a smart bet. 1 star, smart money is staying away. BetQL even lets you sort all of today's games with the best options listed right there at the top of your screen. BetQL gives you access to the same information the pros use. The stuff the sportsbooks don't want you to see. It's time to bet smarter and beat the books with BetQL. Visit BetQL.com today and use promo code PODCAST for 20% off. That's 20% off with promo code PODCAST at BetQL.com.
All right, let's get to your last veteran, and that is Mike Williams, who I feel like has already gotten a little bit of buzz here this offseason. The Chargers are talking about having him be the X receiver. They didn't draft a receiver in the first 2 rounds. They did add Josh Palmer in the 3rd round, but he is slated to be the starting receiver on one of the best offenses in the league. What do you have to say about Mike Williams?
Yeah, so Mike Williams, when I was going through and I was trying to compile this list, Mike Williams is a guy who I was kind of surprised to see some of the names who's going ahead of him. Right now, and again, we're looking at FFPC Dynasty Startups. He's currently going as a wide receiver 55. You'd be shocked to know probably that the wide receiver 54 who's going ahead of Mike Williams is Detroit Lions and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And that's just one of a few names who I think at least I'm personally surprised to hear are going ahead of someone like Mike Williams, who has a 1,000-yard receiving season to his resume so far. He's been in the league for 4 years. He's got a 1,000-yard season to his resume. He has a 10-touchdown season to his resume. He's a former first-round pick. I believe he's 26 years old. And then on top of that, over the course of his career since being in the league in 2017, Mike Williams has averaged 6.7 yards per reception. I'm using a minimum 150 targets just to kind of create a little bit of a threshold there. That's a 5th best span over any wide over. That's a 5th best yards per reception over any wide receiver over that span since 2017. He's a legitimate downfield threat. If you watch highlights, he makes ridiculous catches with basically no regard for his body. He's an impressive, player when he gets a chance to make a play. He's constantly coming down with contested catches. I just think that Mike Williams in this Chargers offense, which you said is already going to be one of the best in the league, hopefully. I think that he has a chance to really perform in a big way on a contract year. His coach, Joe Lombardi, has already come out and said that he thinks it could be a big year for Mike Williams as well. So I I think there's a lot of things that are shaping up for a wide receiver who we've seen string together good fantasy seasons before, but productive fantasy seasons in the past. To go as wide receiver 55 in Dynasty just seems like a really low bar for him to clear right now, especially when you consider guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Corey Davis, Darnell Mooney, Kadarius Toney. These are all players who are going ahead of Mike Williams right now, which is just kind of mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, I like that call. I do think Mike Williams, if he can get through training camp healthy, and that was a problem last year, right? Like when we were watching Hard Knocks, there was a play where he fell hard on his shoulder, and I'm not sure if he was ever healthy since then. So if he can continue some of this positive buzz through training camp, maybe we see him a few snaps in the preseason, and we see these long balls from Justin Herbert down the field. It would not be surprising at all if all of a sudden he's creeping into, wide receiver 47, 48 range rather than wide receiver 45, or excuse me, wide receiver 55. All right, let's talk about some rookies. Let's do Zach Wilson, because I like this call by you, Zach, because there's just – despite being the number 2 pick, there's just not a lot of buzz. Like, we're all excited about Trevor Lawrence for obvious reasons. Trey Lance is getting some buzz. Justin Fields, a lot of people are excited about. But Zach Wilson, QB 18, tell me why you think he's going to rise up.
Well, again, we're talking about Dynasty today, Locked On Dynasty. So this is, you got to factor in more than just a single season, in this case, a 2021 season. Right now, Zach Wilson is going as a QB 18 in these Dynasty startup leagues, behind guys like Tom Brady, Matthew Stafford, and Aaron Rodgers, who I think are, by all accounts, probably closer to being out of the league at this point in time than they are in the league. Nothing to do with their play, but Aaron Rodgers has tossed around the retirement word a few times. Matthew Stafford is, I believe, 32 or 33, if I'm not mistaken. You can correct me on that if you'd like. I don't have it in front of me. And then Tom Brady could literally retire at any point in the season. So there's, from a dynasty perspective, when you factor in the age, those players alone going ahead of him just seems kind of a little too disrespectful to a quarterback who was just, the number 2 overall pick in the NFL draft a few years ago. I'm not necessarily wild about Zach Wilson, being a BYU guy who maybe didn't necessarily play in the toughest conference. He didn't necessarily win a lot of big games, but nonetheless, he's a number 2 overall pick. A few years ago, we watched people laugh at the Bills kind of at their selection at Josh Allen for not being the highest quality of player to draft because of his, lack of accuracy and things like that. I can tell you that one dynasty league, I added Josh Allen, and I did not hate that pick when he kind of fell to me. And I basically took it because I knew he was going to probably start 16 games for a lousy Bills team. But I was like, this is 16 games I'm at least getting out of a quarterback for the next couple of seasons. And if he ends up hitting, then good for me. I probably got a guy who a lot of people slept on who's going to return me tremendous value, which now fast forward to 2020, that ended up being the case. Even if that's not Zach Wilson, he's still going to start games for you as long as he's healthy. And he's got a new regime in place that's going to hopefully, give him the best chances to succeed. They've already done so with some of their offensive line signings. And on top of that, they drafted some pieces around him. They got Elijah Moore. They brought in Corey Davis, added Keelan Cole, which is interesting. But nonetheless, they're putting together pieces to hopefully give him a chance. You can't say that this team isn't trying to put Zach Wilson in a position to at least succeed in year one and hopefully keep him on his feet.
So here's the thing about Zach Wilson early is that Jets defense is going to be awful. Their secondary is awful outside of Marcus May. There's going to be a lot of games, and it's going to be really frustrating to watch, but whatever app you're on, you're tracking your fantasy teams, it's going to be Zach Wilson has 6 points going into the last 9 minutes of a game, and they're getting blown out. And all of a sudden he's got 295 yards and 3 touchdowns, and it's all in garbage time, right? That's going to happen. And if you just close your eyes and you don't look until the end of the game, and Zach Wilson's going to look like a great fantasy quarterback, it's just going to be really ugly, I think, for the first couple of years of his career. Mm-hmm. But we don't care, right? We don't care how players get their points. It doesn't matter. Style points do not matter for us. I think Zach Wilson is going to do a good job of giving us some very usable weeks early on in his career. So I think that's a good call. Let's take – go ahead. Do you have any more thoughts?
Oh, I was just going to say, no one really complained about garbage time Blake Bortles when he was winning you fantasy championships a couple years ago. Or
how about garbage time Gardner Minshew?
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, style points don't matter. You're probably going to be stressed the hell out some weeks watching Zach Wilson play, and like you said, maybe having 6 points heading into the fourth quarter. But at the end of the day, if he gets you there, he gets you there, and hopefully you're doing enough analysis to realize why he's getting you there. And if you can foresee a scenario where he's maybe doing on negative game script alone, if he's performing well in that negative game script, then that might be a decent player to have, especially at quarterback 18, where now you've seen him play well, and you're going to have the benefits of realizing that he's a rookie quarterback compared to some of these older guys who are currently going ahead of him.
Absolutely. All right, let's take one more quick break so I can tell you guys about Built Bar, the absolute best tasting protein bar out there. It's hard to even explain it. It's real chocolate with amazing flavors. It's just a great combination of low calories, high protein, and low sugar with no crazy additives. Best of all, they taste absolutely fantastic. Go to BuiltBar.com and use promo code LOCKEDON and you'll get $10 off your next box at BuiltBar.com. I also want to tell you guys about rockauto.com. It's a family business serving auto parts to customers online for over 20 years. They have everything from engine control modules and brake parts, motor oil, and even new carpet. Whether it's for your classic or your daily driver, get everything you need in a few easy clicks delivered directly to your door. The rockauto.com catalog is unique and remarkably easy to navigate. Quickly see all the parts available for your vehicle and choose the brand specifications and prices that you prefer. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in the How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com today. All right, we've got two more guys left. And listen, you sent me over some notes that you had, Zach, and I'm actually you had a little bit of a cop out here. You wrote two guys for one segment. I'm not going to let you get away with this. So you have Trey Sermon or Michael Carter. You get to pick one of the two. Which one of these two guys is going to shoot up our boards in the ADP over the next couple of weeks?
So I wrote or. That's actually supposed to be a slash because I'm ready to make a case for both of them.
That's cheating. You got to pick one.
Which is why I had them on there. All right. So real quick, Trey Sermon's currently going as a running back 23. Michael Carter is going as a running back 25. Really, the reason I kind of put both down because I just think it's an argument that kind of be made for both. So we'll just take that route then. We'll take that route. I'm making the argument for both right now. Both these players are players who were taken third round or later. They currently are operating in backfields that aren't necessarily the most impressive of backfields, particularly Michael Carter with the Jets. Tevin Coleman is kind of a tried and failed experiment at this point in time in his career. Thought that he could perhaps handle RB1 workload in San Francisco. That didn't work out too well. Now he's with the Jets. Not really sure what he's going to have there. Ty Johnson, the Jets, probably nothing. Ty Johnson is a player who is not offered much in his career. LaMichael Pirine is a second-year running back who no one was overly high on coming into the NFL. So Michael Carter, I think, kind of is already the best running back on his team, most likely. We just haven't seen it yet, and I think drafters are kind of selecting him right now with a little bit of caution, like just in case maybe he's not, which I think he could possibly shoot up the boards relatively easily as training camp stories start to break, as we start to hear about him getting RB1 workloads in training camp. Maybe an impressive preseason game actually pushes him over the limit. I mentioned Chris Carson earlier as a guy who is going ahead of Zach Moss. Chris Carson is currently going one spot ahead of Michael Carter. I think if Michael Carter is named the starter, he probably jumps the shark and possibly even moves into the top 20, depending on maybe how some other training camp reports come out over these other players who are currently going ahead of him over the next couple of weeks. And the same kind of goes for Trey Sermon too. I'll go ahead and plant my flag on Michael Carter as being the bigger jump just because he's currently running back 25. And Trey Sermon, maybe not quite as questionable a situation, but still not a lot of guys who I love who are currently ahead of him. Raheem Mostert's kind of on the opposite end of the age spectrum that I would like to see right now. Jeff Wilson's banged up. Trey Sermon could probably be named the starter before week one as well. So those are two guys who I think drafters are just a little bit hesitant to take higher right now, but if they're named starters by week one or even week two, but really week one since we're talking draft season, then I think their ADPs are going to rise a little bit.
So the question is, who's the better player? Because to me, it's obvious. Trey Sermon's the better player, right? Mm-hmm. It's whose ADP is going to rise a ton over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
It's Michael Carter because for a couple things, right? Like Trey Sermon's game is like on the field with shoulder pads, full contact, like almost like a Nick Chubb style of game. Mm-hmm. Michael Carter is built for Twitter clips, right? Like this awesome, he's going to make these awesome catches in practice, awesome juke moves that fake out linebackers that aren't actually trying to tackle him. Like, and for the fact that he's got the New York media behind him, that's going to just drive the ADP to the moon, right? We're going to see videos of Michael Carter every single day putting linebackers on the ground, and that's going to make him somebody that people get really, really excited about. Again, I don't know how much we should value him actually, because I've got concerns about a 200-pound feature back. You know what I mean? It's always a little concerning, but I think I would not be surprising, Zach, if a month from now these ADPs are flipped. It really would not shock me at all.
Yeah. I think Michael Carter has somewhat of a case to perhaps be. So he's 25 right now. I think there's a chance he could be running back 20. We'll just go running back 20 by the start of the season. It's a little bit of a big ask. Right now, Miles Sanders is currently the running back 20. And just to go through these real quick,
won't surprise me.
Yeah, it's not many here, but David Montgomery running back 21, Jacobs running back 22, Trey Sermon at 23, Carson at 24, and then you have Carter at 25. So I think those are all kind of players who are already on the downswing, at least right now, in terms of fantasy. People aren't overly high on Montgomery. Josh Jacobs, people are all of a sudden concerned about Kenyon Drake eating into too much of his workload. If those narratives kind of fit over the course of the next couple months, and Michael Carter is named the starter, I can kind of see a world where he's jumping some older players like Chris Carson, some rookies who maybe haven't yet given that top job like Trey Sermon, and some other players who are veterans who the market is a little bit down on Josh Jacobs and David Montgomery. Suddenly you have him, perhaps at running back 21, a bad report about Miles Sanders, which I don't think is crazy. I'm not really overly high on the Eagles offense this year. I think there's a path for Michael Carter to be the top 20 dynasty running back, maybe over the final month of the season, if a couple things go right on his end, and if maybe some, bad stories down narrative street arise for some of the other players, because we tend to be very reactionary to those over this time of year.
Again, I'm just preparing you guys now. People that have already had your rookie drafts, go get Michael Carter now, because I promise you his value is going to go up once we get bombarded with Twitter videos and Twitter GIFs of Michael Carter just dusting guys. So the last guy that you had is Rondale Moore of the Arizona Cardinals, currently going as wide receiver 39, second round pick. So he's got some draft capital. We know he's a heck of an athlete, but why do you think his value is going to shoot up here over the next 2 months?
So, like you said, second round draft capital. He's an incredible athlete. He is 5'7", which people have knocked him for a little bit. But he also has an elite breakout age. He broke out, I think, at 18 and a half years old. He had a 30% college dominator rating. And then when I'm looking at some of these players who he's going after in startups, two guys that stood out to me who are other rookies were Rashad Bateman and Elijah Moore. We can't seem to stop talking about Jets, I've noticed on this. We've now covered Michael Carter. I just mentioned Elijah Moore, and we just talked about Zach Wilson. We're not going to focus too much on Elijah Moore here. But the one thing that I thought was interesting with Rondale Moore is people seem to be very high on him from an athletic standpoint, from a tape standpoint, from his first year at Purdue. There's a lot of things that people like about Rondale Moore. Some people even thought that there was a chance he would be a first round draft pick, which just didn't quite happen. But I think it's interesting to see some of the wide receivers who are other rookies who he's going after. Jamar Chase is a given. That's probably in all likelihood very correct. But then you see Rashad Bateman, who I think there could be some volume concerns in Baltimore. I know that Baltimore says they want to throw more, but I think people need to contextualize just exactly what throwing more could look like in Baltimore, because Baltimore has ran a league high, I believe it's about 55% of their run plays over the last 2 seasons, and even regressing down to maybe 52, 53% still doesn't mean that they're throwing all that much more than they are running. And I think that Lamar already has a lot of familiarity with Mark Andrews. As far as Marquise Brown goes, I'm sure he'll still get his. I think Bateman's probably going to lead all wide receivers and targets in Baltimore, but I'm just not sure if the volume's going to be there. And I think there's a situation where for Rondale Moore, the volume could be there. I think they could look to get him the ball in multiple ways. And then for Elijah Moore, it's just kind of the concern that the Jets are going to be, yes, an upcoming offense, but being an up-and-coming offense comes with some of these struggles. Elijah Moore is someone who has really wowed in camp, so I think that his ADP could itself continue to rise. But I think that again, we're talking kind of narratives here in the way we could see stories coming out over the next couple of months where the way players are being used in training camp. I think there's a really legitimate chance that Rondale Moore could get a lot of buzz in training camp and become a player who people start considering as someone they're going to be taking above guys like Rashad Bateman, Elijah Moore, and also guys like Odell Beckham Jr., who is on the wrong side of age and injury history, and even Julio Jones, who is, now over 30 years old and playing with the Titans. Those guys are also going ahead of Rondale Moore. I'm not quite sure that I'd be looking to do that in a dynasty draft at this point in time, realizing what we could potentially have in Rondale Moore with the Cardinals.
Yeah, so Rondale Moore has got the splash factor, right? Like, we've seen a ton of these guys, whether it's in training camp or in preseason. If he makes one big play in the preseason, I don't care if it's in the first preseason game or the third, his ADP is going to skyrocket. Like, if it's a 75-yard slant that he takes to the house, we're going to get really excited about that, just like we got really excited about Amir Abdullah doing that a few years ago. You remember in the preseason, I think it was against the Vikings.
Yep.
Hey, I don't know, maybe it wasn't against the Vikings. I don't remember. Yeah, he was on the Vikings, or he was on Detroit, right?
He was most recently on the Vikings. He may even still be on the Vikings, but he was most recently on the Vikings, drafted by Detroit.
Yeah, he was on Detroit. That's what it was. It was his very first carry in the preseason. He took it like 75 yards to the house. And I remember in our redraft leagues that we were doing that year, it just shot up like 3 rounds.
Yeah,
it's going to happen for a couple of these guys, whether it's Michael Carter, whether it's Rondale Moore, these super explosive young guys that we just haven't seen on the NFL stage yet. One of them is going to pop, and their value is going to change dramatically. So maybe try to get on some of these guys now before we get to training camp and the preseason. Zach, thank you so much for coming on. Tell the people where they can find you.
Sure. Yep. You can find me on Twitter at ZK_FFB. You can also check out some of my articles on rotoviz.com and 444.com. I actually just had an article on each site come out today. I also have a live stream that Marcus is actually going to be joining me on this weekend. Roster Lock, the Best Ball Show. We're going to draft the best ball team here, talk a little bit of draft strategy there. And then I'm also on a podcast with Colin Kelly on RotoViz Radio called the Best Ball Show, which will be wrapping up our summer series soon. But you can definitely check all those out if you are new to the format and want to learn a little bit more about that. So definitely check it out. I'm kind of all over the place, but you can always find me. Hit me up on Twitter if you have any questions or want to know where you can find my work. I'm happy to help you out.
So Kate will be back on Monday. We will continue our Dynasty podcast. Remember, Matt and Ryan, Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Be sure to continue to follow the Locked On Dynasty Football podcast on Twitter. You can download us wherever you get your podcast. Have a great weekend, and we will see you guys next time.